you, Robert.
Okay, this is a recording of the full stack intro exercise. And I am partway through the Q&A, so I'm just gonna do part of it. First of all, there's client, database, and server folders. Client is a Vite, a standard Vite installation, a React app here, with the difference that in Vite config TS, we put this information in here so that when we make fetch calls to our back end, if they start with /API, Vite will forward that request onto our Express server running on port 8080. So you have to make sure this is in there so that your fetch calls to your back end will actually be sent by the Vite server to your back end. Note that the Vite server only runs in development mode when you're running development. When you're running in production, the Vite server doesn't exist, so this stuff doesn't matter. All right, so that's client, and then in database, we have our schema SQL, where you create the schema. Keep in mind that it drops the schema before it does anything else. So when you run your DB import script, it will wipe out your database and rebuild it from scratch. And that's good in development most of the time, because you then get a fresh start. But it does mean that any data that you've accumulated up until that point will be deleted, and that might be sadness. But anyway, it recreates the schema, and then it runs data SQL to insert any seed values into your database. And this import.sh is a script that that does all of this setup. You see it runs schema SQL and data SQL, and it gets the path to the database from this database underscore URL out of the server env file. Here it looks in server.env. So in server, we've got the .env file. This is where our environment variables are kept. They're key value pairs separated by an equal sign with no spaces. So the port's going to be 8080. The database URL will be the connection string that we're familiar with. If you look in the server TS, you can see that the connection string is, instead of us typing it in here like we did before, we're reading it from the env file. This import up at the top, the .env/config, that's what reads in the .env file and sets up everything as a environment variable, so that you can actually access them using this process.env. And then the port down at the bottom, when we listen, we're going to listen to that port. Okay. Then, other than that, the server is just like what we've been doing for the last little while, with your server TS and everything else. The .env file is created from the .env.example. .envs never get pushed to GitHub. .env.example we put in there, which we push to GitHub, so don't put any secrets inside of here. But when you do your npm install, we will copy the env example file into this .env. And so we put that there just so you'll have an idea as to what's supposed to be in your env file. But we make sure we don't ever put any actual secrets inside of your env example, because that gets pushed to GitHub. The .env does not get pushed to GitHub. Okay, then everything else is stuff that we should already be familiar with. And finally, most of the interesting stuff is here in the package JSON at the root of each of the exercises. And what we have is the scripts. So let me go through the scripts. The first one, db:\import, that runs the import sh script that will rebuild your database for you. And then the other ones use this thing called npm run all. The way npm run all works is it runs things in parallel all at the same time. So for example, this one says, so post install is a script that npm runs automatically as soon as it's done doing npm install. It looks for this script and then runs it. And this says run everything that starts with install : in parallel all at the same time. So it'll take these three right here and just run them all. This one does your npm install in the client. This one does the npm install in the server. And this is the one that copies your .env example into .env. Okay, and then there's a dev script. When you do npm run dev, then it actually does this, which runs these guys in parallel. And it'll run both the client and the server, and they get run in the same terminal at the same time. There's this thing here called print label. And when you run this, you'll see a little note that says whether the console messages are coming from the dev or from the client, from the server or the client. And that's what this print label tells it to do. And then there's a command here, npm run tsc, which will run the TypeScript compiler against all of your code. Okay. So that is a very quick overview of the infrastructure for our full stack projects. And the next couple of exercises will use that full stack infrastructure. And your final project will give you we have a template that gets you set up, and it basically sets up this full stack infrastructure for you so that you can use it for your final project. Okay.
So I was wondering, Robert, about the schemas. Are we going to be building one ourselves, or is that something we can learn after the program?
You will be building your own schema. And we'll give you a website that will let you go on, and you do it visually. So you build out your schema, and then you click a button and it generates the schema.sql file for you. Okay. And then of course, your instructor, yours truly, will help you make sure your schema is correct, because we don't really teach you the intricacies of good schema design. So you'll do the best you can. You'll bring it to me, and I'll help you fix any issues with it and make sure it's going to work for what you're trying to do. But we'll go over that next week. Okay. So now, are there any questions on the full stack infrastructure? Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually do the exercise very quickly. Just go through the implementation so you see how these things should be implemented. You're supposed to implement three things here. One of them is a use effect which reads all the to-do items out of the database. One of them is an add to-do, which makes a fetch call to your backend that saves the to-do into the database. And the other one is toggle completed, which flips the completed flag on a to-do item in the database. Okay, so since there's a database here running and working, I did the create database. Okay, so I've created my database already, and if I do npm run db:/import, then that, see, it dropped my schema and then recreated the schema and then created the table that's in there, and inserted 3 rows into it. So now my database has been pre-built. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new tab, and I'm going to run pgweb. This is probably what you're going to want to do every time you do a full stack project. So I run pgweb. I'm going to make this really small because I really don't care what it has to tell me. And now I can flip over and I can run pgweb, which is at 80, 81, which you all have memorized. And I can flip here to my full stack project, and you'll see there's my to-dos table, and it has the 3 rows in it that were just put in there by the data SQL script. Okay. Now I'm up and I've got that going, my database going. Now I'm going to run my servers so that I can start my development. They'll run for you in what we call watch mode, which means it's going to watch for changes, and when it sees changes, it'll reload for you, so it makes a nice convenient development environment. So we have npm run dev. Now I want to pop this out and take a look at it. Here's where it is from starting right here. This is where I ran my npm run dev, and you'll see what it does is it says, okay, it's going to run the dev script in full stack intro, and that tells it to do the npm run all in parallel with print label dev colon star. So we looked at that just a moment ago. What that says is run this script here, npm run dev prefix client, and that says go to the client folder and do an npm run dev. So this runs our client. And then also at the same time, it's doing npm run dev prefix server. And that says go to the server folder and run npm run dev there. So in the client, we're running the Vite server. And in the server, we're running the Express server. So now you see along the edge here, you see that we get this dev colon client, dev colon server. This is a prefix. That print label thing in here, right here, this print label says, print this label here for me so I know which output came from which server. So now both servers, both your Vite server and your Express server are outputting to the same terminal. It can be confusing, but once you get used to it, you'll find it's a lot more convenient because you don't have like 6 terminals open that you're trying to remember what's where and flip between them all. So you get both those servers running at the same time right here, and you just have to look, say dev client. Okay, if it says client, this is all the Vite server output. Server is the Express server output. So here we go. The client now is running Vite. And if we look down here, here's our Vite. Here's our Vite thing that says, hey, okay, Vite's up and running. It was ready to go. And here's the information that it gives you all the time. It tells you what port it's running on and so on. So this is, you should be familiar with seeing this. Every time you run Vite, you get this stuff. Now you're seeing it here, only it has the prefix of this, it has this dev client prefix on it. So you know these lines came from the Vite server. The ones that say server here came from your Express server. So you say here, you see we're running TSX, and we're running it in watch mode, and we're executing the file named server.ts. And let's see, let me see if I can get this up a little bit. And you'll see that now our Express server output the message Express server listening on port 8080. Okay, so this is the console log from the Express server. All right. So if there's a server error, I'll look here and all my server logging will be prefixed with dev server, and all my Vite logging, console logging that happens in Vite will be prefixed with dev client. Okay. That clear?
Yes, so far,
So far, so good.
so
Okay.
far, so good. Thank you, Robert. This is awesome. I'm glad we're recording this.
So now that we've got our servers up and running, we can start doing our development. I'm going to now flip over to my browser, open up a tab, and run my Vite server, localhost 5173. So there's my app right here. Here it is running. All it says is loading ... and it sits there because we haven't implemented the use effect yet. Once I implement the use effect there to read the to-dos, I should get my to-do. So as you'll see here in my to-dos here, my use effect is empty. And so therefore the to-dos array is empty and is loading is true. So I come down here, I hit is loading, and all I'm returning is that. So I need to implement this. So we're going to make an async call inside of a use effect. So we have to declare an async function, and loads as good a name as any. Put a try catch. On the catch, we're going to log it. So we can see it in the dev tools. And then we're going to set error with it
Console.log, Robert.
so that the user can see it. What?
Console.log, not console.error.
No, it actually I want it's the same thing.
Oh,
It is console.error that I did on purpose. Console.log and console.error. Um, you can actually set up your logging so that console.log logs one place and console.error logs a different place. And if you do a console.error, then what people typically do in production is they'll take anything that's a console.error and they'll send it someplace that will then get emailed to the developers. And so the developers will get to see all of the error messages that are happening in their client, and hopefully they'll be able to look through and find bugs and fix the bugs. So I purposely did console.error here. Also, there are lint rules that will say if you have a console.log, it gives you a lint warning and it makes you remove it because logging in the user's browser is not necessarily a good thing. So, uh, so I've just gotten in the habit if I'm logging something to give me development information in the browser, I'll do console.log. If I'm logging something that I think I'm going to want permanently to help me debug, in the future, I do console.error. So I did it on purpose, but we've never really explained that difference, so it wasn't fair of me to do that. But that's why I did it. Okay. All right. So now let's go back and do. Oh, then there's going to be a finally, which is going to be set is loading to false. Okay. Interestingly, remember I said do a little bit and then go check it out. If I do this now, I'm going to set, after my effect runs, I'm going to set is loading to false. And so I should skip this part. This is loading here. And I should get my page title, to-do form, and to-do list. The to-do list won't have anything in it, but that still might be interesting to look and see. Did it work? No, it didn't work. Why did it not work?
Why still
We
empty?
need to call the function. We need to call load.
Thank you. See, that's why you do this. Because you'll find out why isn't it there, and then you'll discover your bugs. So better to catch it now instead of later. There we go.
So we have the header.
Okay. So that all got rendered now because I set is loading to false. So, but what I really want to do is I want to make my fetch call. So I'm going to get my response. I'm going to call fetch and get a response. And the fetch call I'm making is to, what's my endpoint? My endpoints are,
API/to-dos.
thank you. There it is right there. Get API to-dos. API to-dos. Okay, so since it's a get call and I don't need any headers for it, there's no body, I can just call it like that without that second argument. So now once I get my response, what do I always do? I always check to make sure it's okay. And if it's not, display an error. Okay, then once I get it, then I'm going to want to set my to-dos. Oh, no, I can't do that yet. I have to get the to-dos out of the body. So const data equals await response dot fetch. Sorry, it's not fetch, it's JSON, and it's going to be an array of to-dos, right? Okay, and then I'm going to set my to-dos to the data that I just read. Okay. Now I think I'm going to get him. Hope, hope, hope. There we go. I got him. All right. Looks good. All right. So that's that part of it. That should be pretty much similar to what you did before. Yes.
For a estimate only.
Okay. Just 1 second. I'm going to stop recording for a second.